I have not had a woman in 5 years. Caleb Monroe, scarred by the past and marked by 5 years in prison for a crooked scheme he never deserved, let the words break from his throat before the widow Evelyn Turner in a kitchen lit by an oil lamp. Outside, Silver Creek scorned and cast them aside. Inside, a burning kiss nearly shattered the wall between them, sparking a fragile hope. Yet this love would have to fight not only against prejudice, but against the shadow of Eli Whitmore, the ruthless banker swallowing land and crushing anyone who stood in his way. Could they turn their longing into strength and stand together against the power tightening its grip on the town? July 1887. The Colorado sun hung high like a ball of fire in a blinding sky. Heat rolled down over the red dirt road into Silver Creek, making the air shimmer like a mirage. Caleb Monroe sat upright on a thin-ribbed mare, eyes shadowed deep beneath the brim of a worn straw hat. He drew the reins tight, letting the horse pick its way slowly across gravel and stone, dust rising to cling to his faded shirt. 5 years had passed since the day he was locked away. 5 years of slow time behind iron bars, long enough to change his bearing, his eyes, and the way the world chose to see him. That long-ago night, nothing more than a drunken scuffle at a card table had branded him a ruinous man. His opponent had stumbled, hit his head, and lived on crippled. From then on, the name Caleb Monroe carried the mark of trouble, a stain as stubborn as the dust ground into his clothes. The mare whinnied as the first rooftops came into view. Silver Creek, once familiar, looked smaller now, worn thin through the eyes of a man hardened by prison walls. Two-story buildings sagged under warped shingles, signs peeled to bare wood, windows curtained with faded cloth. Boardwalk planks groaned beneath the shuffle of boots, and the whole street seemed to hold its breath as he rode through. Eyes followed him from the general store, the tailor's porch, the druggist's doorway. No greetings came, only stares, some wary, some sharp with contempt. Caleb lowered his head, brim shading half his face, pretending not to hear the murmurs trailing behind. He stopped before the saloon, the town's largest building, its swinging doors forever creaking in the wind. Banjo notes, the clash of glasses, and the sour scent of whiskey spilled out. Caleb slid from the saddle, boots sounding heavy on the steps. Each step inside rang hollow, like a funeral drum. When the doors shut behind him, silence fell hard. Cowboys at their tables looked up. One man let his cigar burn out between his fingers, squinting at the newcomer. Another set down his glass slow, leaning to mutter to a friend. Eyes fastened on Caleb, sharp as knives. Behind the bar, the keeper, a thick-bellied man in a stained apron, kept polishing a glass, voice dry as sand. "We don't serve troublemakers here." The words struck heavier than a fist. Caleb paused, hand on his hat. He dipped his head once, swallowing what he might have said. Arguing was useless. He turned and walked back out, silent. Behind him the murmurs swelled, louder now, fiercer, sealing his place as an outcast. Outside, sunlight struck hot across his face. He drew a deep breath that caught in his chest. He tied the reins again, but didn't mount. His feet carried him down the main street, through the drifting dust, past shuttered windows. He tried Henderson's store, where once he bought iron nails for a corral. Mrs. Henderson, hair silvered now, met him with a look of ice. Caleb asked, halting, "Any work, ma'am? I can haul, mend, roofs, anything at all." She cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. We don't need another hand. No question, no chance given. He went to the telegraph office. The manager there, once a card player at his table, barely glanced before turning him away. Even the livery, where the hardest work was usually left for whoever would take it, refused him. The young stableman folded his arms, smirking as he said, "No room for trouble here. Horses need tending, but I won't have them near you." Caleb stiffened, hand tightening on the saddle's worn leather. Rejection piled on rejection, each one striking like a hammer. Prison had stolen not just years, but the right to be trusted. Evening shadows stretched over Silver Creek. Golden light spilled across rooftops, drawing Caleb's shadow long across the dust. Hunger gnawed his stomach. The mare drooped, blowing hard. He thought of leaving, finding some other town where his name didn't stir whispers. But he knew better. The stain followed him past mountains and plains alike. He stopped at the end of the street, where the wind carried the dry smell of scorched earth and grass. Sweat slid down his cheek, into the long scar across his jaw. That scar, his keepsake from the fight, marked him as surely as the prison brand in folks' minds. He touched it, remembering nights behind bars, when only chains and darkness kept him company. Silver Creek's windows still glowed with lamplight, but none of those lights were for him. He felt himself a ghost drifting through his own homeland, unwanted and half forgotten. A band of children darted past, shouting in play, until they saw him. Then they hushed, shrinking to the porches. A mother pulled her boy inside, door slamming fast. Caleb stood there, the stranger in his own town. He looked to his mare. Her eyes caught the last red light of day, weary yet faithful. Caleb stroked her neck and murmured, "Maybe we shouldn't linger here." Then it came, a quarrel carried down the street. A man's harsh growl, heavy with authority. A woman's voice, strong yet trembling. Caleb lifted his head, eyes sharpening. In the hush of Silver Creek, that clash rang out like a bell signaling a turn in the road. He tightened his grip on the reins, steps angling toward the voices. A strange pull stirred inside him, the sense that fate might not have finished with Caleb Monroe after all. Evening fell over Silver Creek in a red light like dried blood stretched across the ground. The day's heat at last began to fade, though it brought no relief. The whole town lay under a weight of weariness, as if every roof and door groaned beneath the burden of time. Caleb Monroe forced his feet onward. His stomach burned with hunger, his throat dry, and his faithful mare dragged her steps, mane hanging low as though she might collapse. He had thought of leaving, of finding another town, any place where the name Caleb Monroe meant nothing. But he knew the truth. A man does not outrun the shadow of his past. As he turned toward the road that led out to the timberline, a sound stopped him. From the roadside, beside a sun-bleached wagon worn by years of weather, came the bite of an argument. A man's voice, firm and arrogant. "This land won't keep you alive, Mrs. Turner. Best sell now than watch it rot day by day." A woman answered, her words trembling with anger, but not with weakness. "I will not sell. Better to go without than bow my head." Caleb halted, eyes narrowing toward the figures caught in the last light of day. The man in a dark vest, crisp white shirt, and tilted hat, Eli Hartman, the banker, his name known even to Caleb. The smile on his lips carried no warmth, only the pride of one long used to standing over the misfortune of others. Facing him stood a young woman, slight of frame in a patched but clean brown dress. Her chestnut hair was pinned at the nape, loose strands tugged free by the wind to reveal a face weathered by sun, yet bright with resolve. Her hands clenched the fabric of her skirt as if to still the storm inside her, but her eyes shone, unyielding. Evelyn Turner. At her side was a boy of 7 or 8, hair black and tousled, small body nearly swallowed by an old pair of overalls. In his hand he clutched a wooden horse, whittled from a scrap of branch. His wide eyes flickered between mother and banker, filled with fear and restless wonder. Caleb's breath caught. Something in that sight gripped him like a hand unseen. He had no claim, no reason to step closer. A stranger, a man shunned by all. But the strength in the widow's gaze held him fast. Hartman crossed his arms, moved nearer, his voice smooth but edged with calculation. Mrs. Turner, I say this not to frighten you, but your husband is gone. This land is dry, near barren. When winter comes, I fear there'll be nothing here to keep you or the boy alive. I'm willing to offer you a fair price. Evelyn raised her head. The sunset caught in her pale blue eyes until they burned like fire. Fair? You offer half its worth and call it fair? No, Mr. Hartman. I would sooner bleed myself dry than sell my family's land to a man who feeds on the desperate. Caleb saw the boy's small hand clutch at his mother's skirt. A whisper left his lips, tight with fear. Mama. Evelyn bent down, her calloused hand resting on his shoulder, her voice steady. It's all right, Matthew. Hartman frowned, then smiled again, a thin curl of disdain. He straightened his collar, words dripping with superiority. Think it over, Mrs. Turner. Don't let a widow's stubbornness bring suffering on your son. Silver Creek is no kind place for a woman alone. He turned and stepped toward a black carriage waiting in the dust. Wheels ground against stone, lifting a veil of grit as his laughter trailed away. Caleb stood rooted. He had meant to leave this town behind, yet the image before him, of a woman in the fading light, her dress caught by the wind, holding her poigne close, proud and alone, struck him like memory. He saw his mother again, long ago, defying creditors on the steps of their sagging house. That same stance, that same flame in the eyes, it carved itself into him, impossible to look away. His mare gave a low whinny, as if urging him to decide. Caleb touched the brim of his hat, eyes fixed on Evelyn Turner. Something rose within him, strange and insistent, a sense that fate had laid a crossroads at his feet. All day he had met nothing but rejection, scorn, closed doors. Yet here at sundown, with the town bathed in its last blaze, he felt the stirrings of a reason to stay. Evelyn turned to guide her son toward the wagon. The frame was patched, wheels loose, the load no more than a few sacks of flour and worn kitchen tools. But she carried herself as if it were a carriage of gold, as if no power on earth could bend her back. Caleb drew a long breath, swallowing the thought of leaving. His hand stroked the mare's neck, then tightened on the reins. He knew what he must do, what only that very morning would have seemed madness. Step toward the stranger and ask for a chance. He set his feet moving, heavy but certain. Evening shadows stretched long across the ground, joining his own with those of the woman and her boy by the wagon. And in that moment, an invisible bond tied Caleb Monroe's fate to Evelyn Turner's, one that would not break. Caleb tipped his hat, bowing with quiet respect. Road dust lay thick along its brim, across his tangled hair and sun-worn face. Standing before the widow, His voice came rough but firm. I know horses. I can set fence, mend stalls. All I need is food and a place to sleep. Evelyn Turner froze. His name had just fallen from his own lips, and it rang through her memory like an old bell. Caleb Monroe. She had never met him, but the rumors she had heard at the market came rushing back. The so-called troublemaker, a man jailed for a brawl over cards. People whispered it low, as though even his name might chill the skin. Her eyes studied him now. His clothes were threadbare, his hands rough with work, his frame worn from long miles. He looked a man who had nothing left but his labor. Yet in those dark eyes, behind the exhaustion, there was something that made her pause. Not violence, not deceit, only the silent plea of someone beaten down too many times. Matthew, her son, stepped forward, his wide, clear eyes fixed on the stranger. He saw no reputation, no shadows, only a tall man, dust-covered, and a horse near spent with weariness. The boy spoke out, simple and true. Ma, he can help. The child's words cut through the stillness like a blade. Evelyn's grip on her skirt tightened, her lashes flickered. His innocence pressed against her hesitation. She knew the truth. This farm needed strong hands. Without them, it would not stand. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind through the broken posts. At last Evelyn spoke, her tone dry, unyielding. $20 a month, meals, and the hard bed in the stable. Caleb dipped his head, fingers pressing hard against his hat brim. The word "thank you" rose in his throat, but stuck fast. He gave only a nod, then turned to his horse. For the first time in years, someone had cracked open a door. The old wagon carried the three of them away from the roadside. Caleb's mare followed, dust caking her coat, snorting in protest. Caleb rode behind, his grip steady on the reins, though his eyes were fixed ahead, toward the place he was bound for. When the wagon jolted down a rutted track, the Turner farm came into view. Caleb squinted, a wide stretch of land, left to ruin. Fence rails lay splintered, wood bleached and cracked. The barn sagged, roof rotted, timbers leaning near collapse. The pasture lay thin and patchy, bare spots scarring the ground, worn down from years of overgrazing. Evelyn climbed down first, her hands braced against the wagon boards as if drawing strength from them. She looked at the farm with a gaze both weary and resolute. To others, it was a place near finished. To her, it was her husband's last legacy, the ground of her family's memory, the one thing she could not surrender. Caleb dismounted, standing silent beside her. He said nothing, but his eyes took measure of it all. He saw what others would not. The soil, though dry, still held patches of foam, promise. The barn's beams, though weathered, stood sound. The posts, though broken, were not lost. Beneath the dust and ruin, there was a frame waiting to be built upon. His hand clenched the reins. A thought stirred within him. If given trust, this place could be made new, and perhaps so could he. Evening fell. Evelyn led Matthew inside the small house. 2 rooms, a slanting roof, curtains faded by years of sun. Nothing fine, only the smell of old wood, cold ash in the hearth, and the lingering scent of bread. The stable's out back, Evelyn said, cutting short any questions. There's a bed there. Supper with us tonight. Work starts tomorrow. Caleb nodded, asking nothing more. He followed her out. The stable was near ruined, But in one corner, a crude frame held a straw mattress. He set down his worn bundle, straightening it with care. That corner would be the place where he began again. When he turned back, Matthew stood in the doorway, eyes alight. "Do you know horse stories?" the boy asked, eager. For the first time in months, Caleb laughed. Quiet, rough, but real. He gave a nod. "I do. Tomorrow. Tonight I'm tired." Matthew nodded solemnly, then ran off. Caleb watched him go, a strange feeling rising in his chest. The boy had seen something no one else in Silver Creek would. Simply a man, capable of living decent, not a branded outcast. As night covered the farm, Caleb lingered alone on the porch. The sky burned red at the horizon. The wind carried the smell of dry grass, the earth, the call of prairie hens in the brush. His chest eased, as though the walls he had carried for 5 years had cracked, letting in the faintest breath of light. From the cabin window, an oil lamp flickered, casting gold against the dark. Caleb drew in a deep breath. This day had cast him out of every door in town. Yet here, with only a widow's guarded nod and a boy's unshaken trust, he had been given a place to stand. A hard bed in a ruined stable, but to Caleb it was hope. Tomorrow the work would begin, and he knew tomorrow his life must begin again as well. The first days at the Turner farm passed slowly, yet to Caleb every hour felt like a test. He told himself he must work twice, 3 times as hard to prove his presence here was not a mistake. Matthew, the boy with eyes bright and far-seeing for his age, clung to him from dawn till dusk. He followed Caleb to the well in the morning and stayed close as he checked each sagging rail of the fence. "Do horses sleep standing up?" the boy asked, clutching his tiny wooden horse. Caleb set his hammer down, wiped sweat from his brow, and answered in his steady, low voice. "Only sometimes. They rest by locking their legs, but when they need to run, they're ready." "What about you?" Matthew tilted his head, curiosity plain. "Are you dangerous?" The question struck deep. Sometimes the words of a child cut sharper than any blade. Caleb held the boy's gaze, a thin, self-mocking smile on his lips. "Once I was. Not anymore." Matthew nodded, satisfied. "Ma says everyone deserves a second chance." Those few words landed in Caleb's heart like a pardon. They seeped into the dark corners where shame still lived, tapping softly like a reminder. He could begin again, if someone believed. Work shaped itself into a rhythm. Caleb rose before dawn, when frost clung to the air. He lit the fire in the stable, fed the horses, checked hooves, then set to mending the fences. Each swing of the hammer drove more than nails. It drove his resolve into the wood. Evelyn kept busy in the house, tending the kitchen, working the small garden patch, keeping careful notes of the meager money left. Every evening she sat under the oil lamp, eyes narrowed over figures that never balanced. The farm showed little outward change, but the rhythm of life shifted. There was a man's strength at work, the sound of hammer and saw, and Matthew's chatter echoing across the yard. The first supper together came sooner than Caleb had expected. He had imagined eating alone, keeping distance from the widow's eyes and the silence between them. But when Evelyn tapped her spoon against the bowl and called Matthew to the table, her glance lingered on him a moment. It was invitation enough. The kitchen was small, its wood walls glowing under the lamp's gold light. The table held only stew and stale bread, Yet the smell of herbs and salted meat made Caleb's hunger bite deep. He sat stiff in the chair, feeling a stranger in a house not his own. Matthew watched him wide-eyed, as though waiting for a tale to spill from his lips. Evelyn served each portion with slow, sure movements, long practiced in carrying burdens. Silence stretched, broken only by the scrape of spoons. Caleb dared not stare too long, but in the corner of his vision the lamplight touched Evelyn's face, lined with weariness, set with resolve, and softened by a gentleness she could not hide. Then Matthew tipped his spoon, spilling broth across the table, and laughed at his own clumsiness. Caleb found himself laughing too. The sound rang through the small house, golden as the lamplight, washing away the heavy quiet. In that moment, Caleb stilled. How long had it been since he'd heard a child's laughter so near? How long since he had sat at a family's table, even for a simple meal? 5 years of prison nights, chained in silence, seemed to fade. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. After supper, Evelyn cleared the dishes while Caleb lingered at the kitchen door, watching her move. He said nothing, but something stirred in his chest, a weight both foreign and grateful. Matthew had gone to the porch with his wooden horse. Caleb followed, sitting on the step. The boy whispered, "This horse can't run, but can you make it run in your stories?" Caleb chuckled softly, nodding. "I can. Tomorrow." Matthew leaned against his shoulder, yawning. His small head made the burden on Caleb's shoulder heavy and warm. From inside, Evelyn glanced out. In the lamp's glow, she saw the stranger sitting quietly beside her son. Perhaps it had been a long time since her house had held such peace, but Silver Creek was not quick to forget. The next morning, when Evelyn went to market, whispers spread fast. "The widow took a man into her home," one woman drawled, loud enough for all to hear. "And not just any man, a troublemaker." "Foolish," another replied with a pitying shake of the head. "What will become of her boy, living under the same roof as him?" Evelyn heard every word, but kept her chin high and her eyes cold. Even the shopkeeper handed her goods with trembling fingers, as if the very name Caleb Monroe might soil her. Rumors spread quicker than wind, climbing over hills and fences alike. Caleb knew well. One mistake, and they would use it to snuff out his only chance. That evening, when Evelyn returned burdened with supplies, Caleb silently reached to take the load. They said nothing, yet their brief meeting of eyes was enough. They both knew what had been spoken in town. The house settled again into quiet, filled only with the clatter of ladle against pot and the crackle of wood in the stove. Yet beneath that quiet, something small was taking root. A bond, fragile but real, weaving itself between 3 souls set apart from the world. Caleb sat still, watching the firelight play across Evelyn's face. In her tired eyes, he saw the very thing his own heart longed for: a home, a family, a place where he might no longer be an outcast. And within him, a slow faith was lit. Faith that here in this plain wooden house, he might truly begin again. Rumor in Silver Creek spread faster than fire on a dry wind. Barely weeks had passed since Caleb Monroe set foot on the Turner farm, yet the whole town had its version of the tale. Men repeated it in the saloon, women whispered it on the church steps, and even at the counter of the general store the words took root. The widow Turner took the troublemaker into her home. What will her boy become growing up with an ex-convict under the roof? Won't be long before there's trouble. Those murmurs reached Evelyn each time she stepped beyond her gate. At the store, she felt the eyes of women turn toward her, then dip with mocking smiles. At the schoolhouse, Matthew told her some children no longer wished to play with him, saying, "You've got a dangerous man at home." Evelyn held steady, but at night, once the lamp was dark, she lay awake long hours. One autumn morning, while Caleb was mending the south fence, hands coated in dust, hoofbeats sounded steady at the gate. He looked up to see Sheriff Landry ride in. She was past 50, tall and broad-shouldered, her gray hair tied neat, her worn leather coat carrying weight enough on its own. The sheriff dismounted, gray eyes fixed on him, neither hurried nor slow. Caleb wiped his hands on his trousers, bowed his head slightly, voice even. "Ma'am, Sheriff?" Evelyn stepped from the house, apron dusted with flour, worry in her face. She pulled the kerchief from her hair and asked, "What brings you here, Sheriff?" Landry's voice was calm but heavy. "I've heard many concerns from town. Folks say his past," she nodded toward Caleb, "might repeat itself. They fear Silver Creek isn't safe with a convict living so near." Evelyn hesitated, then stood tall, her tone sharp and sure. "He works honest, hard, quiet. This is my home, and I will decide who stays." Silence stretched, taut as a drawn bow. Caleb, standing a few steps off, lowered his head slightly. In his chest, his heart beat slow and heavy, struck by what he had not expected, someone standing for him. Sheriff Landry gave a slow nod, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "I understand, but be careful. Words can cut deeper than bullets." With that, she mounted, and the horse carried her away, dust rising in her wake, leaving the yard heavy with quiet. Evelyn stood still, fist tight against her apron. The sheriff's doubt still echoed in her mind. She knew Caleb deserved a chance, yet she could not deny the weight of whispers in a small town. A widow's place was fragile already, now under sharper eyes than ever. Caleb stepped closer, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Turner. I don't wish to bring you or the boy more trouble. If you ask it, I'll leave." Evelyn turned sharply, her blue eyes fierce. "No, I won't let them decide for me." Caleb froze. His chest tightened with something he could scarcely name. Gratitude, wonder, and fear. Fear that one day the burden of gossip would change her mind. But for now, she had chosen to stand with him, and for a man long cast aside, that was worth more than anything. Still, the house changed in the days that followed. The lightness of that first supper was gone. Evelyn spoke kindly enough, urged Matthew with his lessons, thanked Caleb for his labor, but in her eyes sometimes flickered an unease she could not hide. Matthew noticed too. He still followed Caleb everywhere, yet at times came home from school quiet, eyes downcast. "My friends said you're bad," he whispered one afternoon. Caleb rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, unsure how to answer. He would not lie, yet he would not let the boy carry shame for him. "People can say what they will," he said softly, "but what matters is how we live." Matthew looked up, blinking as though willing himself to believe. From the kitchen doorway, Evelyn listened, her knife pausing over the potatoes. Her heart ached. She knew keeping Caleb meant her son would bear the sting of other children's words, the echoes of adult scorn. Yet when she thought of Caleb bent over the fence in the sun, or of his quiet eyes softening at Matthew's laugh, she could not turn him away. One evening, When autumn winds swept the yard, Evelyn carried a lamp to the porch. Caleb sat sharpening a saw, his shadow stretched long across the ground. "Let them talk," she said slowly, voice low but steady. "I see clear enough. You've worked from before sunrise till dark. You've never spoken harshly to me or to Matthew. That is enough." Caleb looked up, the lamplight catching in his eyes, a brief shimmer of feeling breaking through. He meant to speak, but only nodded. Sometimes silence was the only way to keep the heart from spilling over. The little house grew taut, fragile. Outside, the town whispered. Inside, 3 souls clung to what peace they could. Evelyn bore the weight each time she walked into town. Matthew carried sadness from the schoolyard, and Caleb, though worn, held one small fire alight. For the first time, someone had stood for him, and it was that choice, more than anything, that kept him rooted, even against the headwinds rising from Silver Creek. That night, black clouds rolled in from the western range, swallowing the Silver Creek sky. Wind hissed across fields stripped bare, carrying the damp scent of earth waiting for rain. Then the storm broke, sudden, furious, like a wild herd loosed in the dark. Rain lashed the roof of the crumbling stable. Caleb sheltered inside, his shirt soaked through, clinging to his back and shoulders. He had tried to brace the gaps with planks, but the wind still tore through, making the lantern on the wall flicker weakly, flashing and fading. He crouched beside his horse, rubbing a towel along its dripping coat. The steady rhythm of rain mixed with the animal's labored breath, a cold counterpoint to the chaos outside. The stable door swung open, casting a fresh glow across the gloom. Evelyn stepped in, an oil lamp trembling in her hand. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, strands of rain-slicked hair clinging to her brow. Her rough-spun dress was half-soaked, clinging close, revealing the form usually hidden beneath its modest folds. I thought you could use another light," she said, her voice husky from the wind. Caleb looked up. The lantern's gold burnished her face, her pale eyes shining like wet gems. For an instant, the storm outside ceased to matter. Only their breath filled the narrow space. He rose, reaching instinctively to take the lamp from her. Their fingers brushed. A fleeting touch, but it struck them both like lightning. Now there was only the span of a breath between them. Caleb saw the raindrops trace her throat, sliding down to her collarbone. Evelyn saw the scar along his jaw, a relic of the past. But instead of fear, her hand lifted, trembling to touch it. An unthinking gesture, as if to smooth it away, as if to tell him, the past is not all. Caleb's chest tightened. 5 years in prison walls, 5 years without the touch of a woman's hand. Not pity, not disdain, but gentleness. His body burned, though his shirt was chilled through. "Evelyn," he murmured, the name breaking rough in his throat. She lifted her gaze, eyes locked on his. Their breaths mingled, the scent of rain, damp wood, faint soap from her skin. Caleb leaned closer, every muscle drawn taut, as if the whole of him urged forward. Evelyn tilted toward him, lips parted in a wordless answer. They neared, not from reckless hunger, but from loneliness long endured. For a heartbeat, they were 2 outcasts finding warmth in each other's shadow. But then, "Ma." Matthew's voice drifted faintly from the house, half dreaming yet sharp enough to break the taut silence. Evelyn drew back, hand slipping away, Her face flushed. Her eyes wavered. Caleb bit down hard, turning aside, his grip whitening on the stable wall. He drew a harsh breath, wrestling the fire surging through him. She avoided his eyes, lifting the lamp quickly. Her words stumbled, urgent. I must see to Matthew." The door shut behind her, leaving Caleb alone in the wavering light. His heart still hammered, blood still hot in every vein. He pressed his hands against the wall, bowing his head. "Steady, Monroe. Steady." The words tore silent from his lips. He could not let himself step across that fragile line. Not with Matthew under this roof. Not with Evelyn's trust. A gift denied him by every soul in town. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, only his ragged breath joined the drum of rain. Caleb knew the night ahead would be long. That morning, the sky hung gray and heavy, foretelling trouble. Caleb was in the stable, bent over an old saddle he was patching. Each strike of the hammer landed sure, yet unease gnawed at him. He felt the weight of the town's stares each time Evelyn returned from market. The whispers wound tight around the house like an invisible noose. Hoofbeats broke the silence. More than one horse, a cluster pounding hard against the dry ground. Caleb looked up, sweat gone cold on his brow. Through the crack of the stable door, he saw dust rising, then the figures took shape. Eli Whitmore, the wealthy banker ever circling the Turner land, rode in front. Behind him came three broad-shouldered men, faces sharp with swagger. They halted in the yard, eyes sweeping like predators. Whitmore dismounted, brushed his coat, and smiled thin as frost. "Well now, this is a sight," he called, his voice cutting, loud enough to carry into the stable. "A lonely widow taking in a jailbird, planning to raise a brood of half-breeds, are you?" The men behind him burst into cruel laughter, harsh and echoing. Caleb rose at once. His hand trembled as it tightened around the hammer, knuckles white. His chest heaved, breath ragged. The prison years rushed back, taunts, brawls, the instinct to strike or be broken. His fists clenched, violence surging in his blood. "Careful, Whitmore," he rasped through his teeth. "Don't test my patience." Their laughter only grew, sharper, mocking. One man jabbed a finger toward him. "Hear that? The convict's ready to snap. Look at him shake." Caleb's body coiled, ready to lunge, when a small, firm figure broke into the yard. Evelyn. She strode forward from the porch, apron still dusted with flour, hands gripping the fabric tight. Her face was pale with anger, but her voice rang cold and steady. "Enough! Leave my land now!" The yard fell silent. The men hesitated, taken aback. Evelyn stood between them and Caleb, her blue eyes hard as tempered steel, unflinching. Whitmore's smile curled again. He stepped closer. "Mrs. Turner, I only came out of concern. Everyone can see you're reckless. Keeping a man like him under your roof is no different than putting yourself and your boy in danger." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "Who I keep in my house is no concern of yours." Whitmore tilted his head, his smirk widening. "People will talk. Reputation doesn't wash clean, widow." Evelyn drew a deep breath, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "They've talked enough, and I've heard enough. This is my land, my home. Go before I lose my patience." Her words struck like hammer blows. The men glanced at one another, faltering. Something in her defiance, this thin, unarmed woman holding her ground, made them edge back. Whitmore's brow creased, though his smile lingered faint. "Very well. I'll respect your poor judgment. But remember, winter shows no mercy. Don't expect a hand to save you. When it comes, he jerked his chin, and his men followed. Hooves thundered again, carrying them off, leaving only dust and silence behind. Caleb exhaled hard, his grip still locked around the hammer. Cold sweat traced his spine. Had Evelyn not stepped in, he might have lost everything to one reckless moment. He looked at her. Her shoulders trembled faintly, yet her eyes burned bright. "Evelyn." His voice cracked, hoarse. "I—" "Say nothing," she cut in, her tone clipped. "You owe me no explanation." Caleb lowered his head. But inside something shifted. It wasn't pity for himself. It was gratitude, deep and anchoring. She hadn't only shielded him. She had chosen to stand with him against the most powerful man in Silver Creek. For the first time in years, Caleb felt worth something. And for the first time, he dared believe he might deserve to stay. The wooden house lay quiet in the night. Outside, the wind slipped through the newly raised fence, whistling faint and thin, like the far-off whispers of the prairie. In the kitchen, only the wavering glow of an oil lamp cast its golden haze across the walls, weaving patches of shifting shadow. Evelyn sat in her familiar chair, needle working through a piece of worn cloth. Her hands moved steady, each stitch tight, yet her eyes drifted. The image of the afternoon lingered sharp in her mind. Caleb in the stable, body taut with rage, near to breaking loose, and she herself stepping in, driving those men off. It had not only been protection, it had been a choice. A choice to stand with a man the whole town scorned. The door creaked open. Caleb stepped in, holding a wooden cup. He set it beside her sewing, then lowered himself into the chair across from her. Silence stretched, heavier than usual. Only the ticking of the old wall clock broke it. Evelyn lifted her gaze and met his, dark eyes, holding something deep, shadowed, uncertain. Caleb laid his calloused hand flat on the table, hesitating as if words pressed behind his lips. Unthinking, Evelyn's hand slipped down too, brushing his. The touch was slight, but neither of them drew away. The air thickened, their breathing slowed, heavy. The space between them shrank, not by movement, but by the quiet pull drawing them closer. Evelyn heard her own heartbeat pounding, echoing in her chest, matched by the pulse she felt across the table. Caleb spoke at last, voice low and rough, dragged from deep inside. "I've never known this house to be so quiet." Evelyn pressed her lips together, her eyes brightening. How long had it been since anyone had called this place a home? Since her husband's death, it had been emptiness, wind whistling through cracks, and burdens piled high. Yet now, across from her sat a man who somehow made the little kitchen feel warm again. Caleb swallowed, his gaze locked on hers. The words came out raw, unpolished. "I have not had a woman in 5 years." It was no crafted confession, no calculation, just truth, stripped bare, heavy with hunger long suppressed. Evelyn trembled. In his eyes she saw it, the burning loneliness, the absence of touch through years of prison walls, and the fear of being turned away. They leaned in, slow at first, then faster, as if drawn by something neither could resist. Their lips met in a first kiss, rough, fierce, the force of silence and longing, pent up too long. Evelyn's hand shook as she reached across the table, touching his chest. Through the coarse fabric she felt his heart hammering, his breath hot. But the moment startled her. She pulled back, lips parting, eyes wide with confusion. Her voice came hushed, breaking. We should not. The words stood like a wall between them, yet both knew nothing could erase what had passed. The kiss was real. It would not be forgotten. Caleb sat rigid, his eyes burning through his hands, clenched hard on his knees, forcing restraint. He drew a deep breath, nodding, as if to bind himself again to that fragile line. Evelyn lowered her gaze. The cloth had slipped to the floor, her needle still tangled in the thread. Her hand trembled as her chest ached. She had not expected how easily she could lean toward him. A man with a scarred past, yet one who gave her a peace she had not felt in years. The lamp's flame quivered, spilling uncertain light across two faces flushed with feeling. Outside, the prairie wind keened, but inside the kitchen, silence bore witness to the fragile moment they had crossed. They sat long, without another word. Yet when they rose, their eyes spoke what neither dared say aloud. They had stepped past a line unseen, and though they told themselves we should not, both knew in their hearts there was no going back. The late autumn wind struck Silver Creek, whipping dust through the streets and carrying whispers that circled the name of Caleb Monroe. Only yesterday, he had been in the Turner stable, patching a saddle and mixing hay for the horses. Now the iron door of the jail clanged shut behind him. Sheriff Landry stood stern before the bars, her voice low and clipped. There's been a charge that you threatened Whitmore and his men. I've no choice but to hold you. Caleb lifted his head, eyes shadowed. He remembered the morning well, the insults, the fingers jabbed at his face. He had held back, had stood behind Evelyn rather than strike and bring ruin. Yet the accusation painted another story. In the narrow cell, he lowered himself onto the bench, hands loose on his knees. The chill of iron echoed louder than any wind outside. The door opened. Heavy boots sounded. A familiar figure appeared. Eli Whitmore. The banker wore his fine coat, the faint reek of cigar smoke clinging to him. He sat in a chair opposite the bars, lips bent in a smile too smooth to be honest. Caleb, 5 years in prison and you still haven't learned. One false word, and here you are again. Caleb said nothing, his jaw set. Whitmore leaned in, voice lowered, each word deliberate. I'll be plain. Leave Silver Creek tonight, and this all disappears. You'll walk free, so long as you vanish. Stay, and the woman will lose everything, her land, her house, and her safety. Caleb's teeth ground. You're threatening Evelyn. Whitmore chuckled. I'm speaking truth. What can a widow live on without protection? She'll have no choice but to sell me her land. And that boy of hers, he'll grow up with nothing to cling to. The words cut like a knife. Rage surged through Caleb, the urge to lunge, to crush that mocking grin, but he forced it down, eyes hard and cold, clinging to control as his last defense. Whitmore rose, dusted his coat. Think well, my friend. This chance won't come twice. The iron door slammed, leaving Caleb in shadow. Evelyn did not sit idle at home. The morning after his arrest, she left Matthew with a trusted neighbor and walked the dirt roads to the scattered farms nearby. She knocked on doors, old Dawson's, widowed Clarice's, the family of new settlers. Each one had felt Whitmore's threats to sell. At first, all shrank back, fear flickering in their eyes. They whispered, "No one crosses Whitmore. His men will come at night." Evelyn stood silent, her heart sinking. Then she dropped to her knees before them, voice breaking. "I beg you, Help me. Help me save Caleb. He is no villain. I will stake my life on it." Tears slid down her cheeks, her thin hands clutching at her skirt. The woman once proud now shed all dignity, left only with pleading. The room stilled. Some averted their eyes, but something shifted. Clarice's hand, frail and trembling, touched Evelyn's shoulder. I lost everything to Whitmore. If you have the courage to stand, then I'll not stay silent either." Faith spread slowly, one voice, then another, until several families agreed to sign a petition. They knew the risk was great. Yet for the first time they saw a widow kneeling for what was right, and if she dared, why should they remain bowed forever? When Evelyn returned home, her hands shook as she clutched the signed papers. Fear was still in her, but so too was something brighter: resolve. That night, searching through Caleb's old law books, she found an aged clipping tucked between pages. The paper had yellowed, brittle with years. It told of the brawl 5 years past, the charge that had branded Caleb a troublemaker. Evelyn's eyes froze on one name: Rufus McCord. Her heart lurched. Rufus had not been some nameless drunk crippled in a fight. He had been Whitmore's own enforcer, the man who collected debts and spread fear. "Oh God," she whispered, the paper slipping from her hands. Truth struck hard. Caleb had not been the villain. He had been the scapegoat, used so Whitmore could rid himself of a henchman and smear another man's life. Now Evelyn knew. She must be the one to bring it to light. Outside, dust storms swept the fields, veiling the moon. In the jail, Caleb sat silent. His shadow stretched long across damp stone. He did not know Evelyn spent the night awake, gathering truth to free him. In the kitchen, the lamp still burned low. Evelyn tied the bundle of papers tight with twine. Her eyes no longer wavered. They burned with resolve. "He used you, Caleb," she whispered to herself. "But this time, I won't let it stand." Dawn neared. A new fight lay ahead, not just for the Turner farm, but for the truth of the man locked behind bars. That gray afternoon, Silver Creek seemed to hold its breath. A crowd gathered outside the jailhouse, stirred by whispers that Whitmore's mask was slipping. Evelyn had been there since morning, clutching papers creased from her trembling hands. The petition bore the signatures of a few brave families, testimonies that left onlookers shaken. When Sheriff Landry stepped out holding the papers, Evelyn almost stopped breathing. The sheriff's eyes had changed, no longer wary of Caleb, but bearing a quiet acknowledgement. The iron door swung open. Caleb emerged, tall but worn. His eyes, when they found Evelyn, lit for an instant. He hadn't spoken a word before she rushed to him, tears streaming as she wrapped him tight. "Caleb," her sob caught in her chest. "I was afraid I'd never see you again." His arms tightened around her, his rough hand smoothing her damp hair. He whispered only, "I'm here. Because of you." The crowd slowly dispersed, though curious stares lingered. Evelyn paid them no mind. All that mattered was Caleb's freedom, and that this time, even if the whole world turned against them, she would not leave his side. That night, the Turner kitchen glowed under the oil lamp. Matthew lay asleep in his small room, leaving a rare silence for the two of them. Evelyn sat at the table, eyes rimmed red, her fingers twisting her apron. Caleb sat across, his face lined, his gaze heavy with weariness. For a long while neither spoke. Only the clock ticked, the wind whispering at the cracks. Then Evelyn's voice broke the hush, low but steady. All these years I've lived under judgment. They called me foolish, stubborn. But you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Faith. And for Matthew, the care of a father. Her shoulders trembled. Tears brimmed again, but now they carried release rather than despair. Caleb reached across, his calloused hand covering hers, warm, solid, holding fast. His dark eyes met hers, voice hushed and raw. Evelyn, I'm unworthy. My past is stained, my hands scarred, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life protecting you and Matthew. Her tears fell freely. Evelyn rose, circling the table, and sank beside him. Her hand cupped his face, tracing the scar at his jaw, the mark of a past he had long tried to hide. Caleb, her voice shook. I won't hide anymore. I choose you, not out of pity, but because of who you are. He drew her close. This time, nothing held them back. Their lips met, fierce and certain, not born of loneliness, but of vow unspoken. In the small kitchen, under the wavering lamp, they poured into each other all that had been denied: fear, longing, and newfound trust. The lamp burned low, its glow spilling ragged across the wooden walls. Caleb held her as if afraid to release her, as if she might vanish. The kiss deepened, urgent, the weight of years breaking open in a single moment. His arms lifted her slight frame. Evelyn gasped, clutching at his shoulders, her face flushed. Yet instead of pulling away, she let him carry her from the kitchen toward the old wooden bed in the room beyond. The bed creaked under them, its frame straining against the storm of passion. Evelyn covered her face, shy, but when she lifted her gaze, it shone with trust. Caleb, she whispered, trembling, aching, wanting. He bent to her, his lips trailing her shoulder. Evelyn shuddered, her hands clutching his back, caught between caution and surrender. Years of emptiness, of cold nights without touch, broke into a flood no will could stop. The old bed groaned with every movement, bearing witness to their first true union. Outside, the wind roared across the prairie, but inside its rhythm blended with heartbeats and breath. Evelyn was no longer the widow bowed beneath loss. Caleb was no longer the man branded a troublemaker. Here they were simply a woman and a man, finding refuge in one another. He held her tight, whispering through ragged breath, "You are my home. You are my home." Tears spilled from Evelyn's eyes, not of grief, but of being seen, of being loved. She clung to him, answering with all her heart and body. The night stretched long, filled with warmth, with awkward sounds turned tender, with the old bed creaking like a hymn. Whatever the weight of their pasts, here was a present alive, burning bright. At last, lying still in his arms, Evelyn rested her head upon his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only the rustle of wind through trees. "I've chosen you," she whispered, "and I'll not regret it." Caleb drew her closer, his face buried in her hair. He spoke no more, for words were needless. Everything had already been written on their bodies, on their souls, in this night. That night, in the small wooden house at the prairie's edge, A new beginning took shape. Outside the fences the wind still wailed, but within, warmth and breath entwined. A widow who had borne loss, a man once cast aside. At last they had found each other, not from loneliness, but because they had truly chosen one another. The noonday sun beat down on Silver Creek's main street, harsh and unyielding. Dust rose beneath the feet of hundreds gathered, the whole town holding its breath, waiting for a moment that might turn the world on its head. On the bank's front steps stood Eli Whitmore, still draped in his usual arrogance, his vest pressed, his polished shoes catching the light. Yet his eyes flickered unease at the sight of strangers riding in, federal marshals, their long coats sweeping in the wind. Sheriff Landry stood with them, a thick file in her hand. Her voice rang out, sharp as a hammer blow. Eli Whitmore, you are under arrest for fraud, coercion, and forcing Silver Creek's people to sell their land for a pittance. Here is the evidence gathered. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Those who once stood with Whitmore dropped their gaze. He forced a laugh, brittle. On the word of a widow and an ex-convict, this is slander. But when Landry held up forged contracts and sworn testimonies from families driven off their land, his protest rang hollow against the truth. An old woman stepped forward, voice quavering. It was him. He forced me to sell my family's land for half its worth. A man followed. He threatened to drive cattle through my pasture if I refused to sign. Accusations poured forth, one after another, like a flood breaking loose. The crowd's mood shifted, doubt hardening into fury. Whitmore struggled, but the marshals bound his hands, his shining shoes now ground into the dust, the very dust he had long looked down upon. In that moment, Caleb stepped forward. No longer the man who once lowered his head entering a saloon, he stood straight, broad-shouldered, eyes steady as he faced the town. I have made mistakes, he said, his voice clear, carrying. One rash moment cost me 5 years in prison, but a single mistake does not define a man's whole life. The square hushed. Those who had mocked, whispered, and turned their backs now slowly nodded. A hand reached out. The blacksmith, heavy-set, eyes softened with regret. Then another. The innkeeper who once had driven him off. Each handshake was more than forgiveness. It was recognition that Caleb stood restored among them. Evelyn stood at the edge of the crowd, her hand resting firm on Matthew's shoulder. Her eyes shone with tears as she watched. All the months of scorn, all the sleepless nights spent poring over law books, all the doors she knocked on begging for signatures. Every burden now converged into this single moment. Caleb turned, walking toward them. He stopped before Evelyn, voice low but strong, ringing into the silence of the street. I want to stay, but not as a hired hand. I want to be your husband. I want to be Matthew's father. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. In a flash she saw it all. The long years of widowhood, the meals without a man's laughter, the dread of facing Whitmore alone. And now here was the home, man once cast aside by the whole town, kneeling in honor, asking for a place in her life. She stepped forward, her trembling hand rising to his cheek. Her voice broke as she answered, I want that too, Caleb. The crowd held still. Then Matthew, bold and innocent, cried out with joy. Pa! He rushed into Caleb's arms, clutching tight. That single cry, pure as flame, lit the hearts of the town. Applause broke out, cheers rolling like thunder. Those who once whispered in scorn now shouted in triumph, as though they had all borne witness to something greater, the birth of a family from ruin. Caleb wrapped both Evelyn and Matthew in his arms, eyes wet. From the crowd, a voice rang. "It's time Silver Creek had a new beginning." The shout carried across the dusty street. And there, in the center, three souls held fast to one another, knowing that though the past was heavy, the future had been rewritten in that very moment. Half a year had passed since Silver Creek witnessed the fall of Whitmore and the rising of a man once branded a troublemaker. That summer, the Colorado sky stretched an impossible blue. Across the distant hills, young grass rolled like an emerald carpet, wildflowers bent and swayed in the breeze, and golden light lay wide upon the fields. The wedding day came. Not a grand affair, no champagne or glittering jewels, but a simple feast beneath the open sky held at the Turner Place, now called Monroe Ranch. Townsfolk who had once doubted or mocked came bearing dishes and smiles, adding their joy to the day. A long table, hammered together from rough boards, sagged under roasted meats, cornbread, vegetables, and pies fragrant with apples. Laughter rose across the meadow. Children shouted and chased one another among patchwork balloons sewn from scraps of cloth and twine. In the crowd, Matthew darted about, cheeks flushed, clutching the crown of wildflowers he had woven for his mother. Caleb stood at the porch, wearing a plain vest that pulled a little against his broad frame. His eyes followed the field where Evelyn came walking. Her dress was not store-bought finery, but the handiwork of women from town, each stitch sewn with blessing. Her face shone, her dark hair twined with meadow blooms, her smile gentle as sunlight after rain. Matthew, solemn as a young man, walked ahead, bearing a rough cloth pillow with the rings. His small chin lifted, eyes gleaming with pride as he looked to Caleb, the man he now called father. The crowd hushed as the preacher spoke, his voice rising and falling with the wind. Caleb clasped Evelyn's hand, his own scarred and calloused, holding her trembling fingers tight. He spoke his vow, each word steady, sure. "I swear to protect you and Matthew, to build a home here with you, and to spend my life proving that a man can change, a man can be forgiven." Tears shimmered at Evelyn's eyes as she answered, "I swear to stand beside you, to share every burden, and to love you as you have given me and my son a new home." "Amen," the preacher's voice echoed, and the crowd broke into cheers. Caleb bent, kissing Evelyn's lips in the roar of voices, with sky and earth as witness. In that moment, the world shrank to nothing but them. A man once lost, a widow once despairing, and a boy who now had a father. The celebration stretched into evening. A fiddle sang. Voices rose in song. Children played, and grown folk lifted cups in toasts. Even Sheriff Landry was there. Her stern face softened, her eyes lit with faith. As the sun sank behind the mountains, spilling red fire across the fields, Caleb walked the fence line with Evelyn at his arm. The wind carried the scents of dry grass, warm earth, and fresh-born joy. "Now I have found home, Evelyn," he said softly, voice thick. She leaned into him, smiling through her tears. "We found each other when we needed it most." They stood in silence, listening to Toast, Matthew's laughter ringing somewhere close, the faint clop of hooves drifting from the hills. In that moment, the past closed like a book heavy with dust. Before them lay an open page, a future where an outcast had a family, and a woman once alone had found love again. Night came. Oil lamps burned warm along the porch, music and laughter spilling on. Overhead, stars blazed, bearing witness to the vows spoken that day. On land once steeped in suspicion and scorn, a home had been raised, built of love, trust, and endurance. And so the tale of Caleb Monroe and Evelyn Turner became part of Silver Creek's memory, a story of a wedding season, a season of faith, and a new beginning. Friends, this story closes not with gunfire or hatred, but with the light of a home. From a man marked as a troublemaker, Caleb found redemption in the faith of a widow and the love of a boy who needed a father. Together they bore the scorn of neighbors, pushed through the weight of the past, and built a family both humble and strong. Perhaps each of us has carried mistakes, losses, or the ache of being left behind. Yet when someone dares to see us without judgment, when a hand dares to hold ours in our darkest hour, we learn that it is never too late to begin again. If you too have found a late blooming home, or watched love take root after ruin, share your thoughts in the comments below. Caleb and Evelyn's tale is but one of many Wild West love stories in life's great weave. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your message. We long to hear your stories, your memories, and your faith. You who have weathered many seasons of wind, leaving behind lessons of love and mercy for those who come after.